Thank you for having me. In this presentation, I hope to cover four basic themes. First, I'll discuss what the term atheist means. From there, I'll move on to a more sensitive area, and I'll touch on why I and most other atheists feel that faith is overrated. This will lead us into an exploration of exactly what we are discussing when we speak of God. Believe it or not, it's not a clear-cut issue. Finally, I will briefly discuss the issue of God's necessity as a first mover, and whether it's possible to have a universe with no deity in it. Hopefully, by the time I have completed my presentation, you'll have a better understanding of what atheism is, and perhaps, as importantly, what it is not. The word atheist has its roots in the Greek and Roman world and predates Christianity. It was a word made up of the Greek prefix a, meaning without, and the word theos, meaning God or gods. It was a word that was employed to describe anyone who rejected the Godhead of the majority. In fact, since the Roman pantheon was a dominant religion at the time of Peter and the early Christian church, Christians were considered to be atheists to the Roman theocracy. It was a pejorative. Once Christianity came in vogue under Constantine, however, the term came to mean anyone who did not follow the Christian faith. Followers of Mithras, Jews, pagans, even alternate Christian sects such as the Gnostics and the Cathars, and later the Eastern Orthodoxy came to be called atheists. Today, however, in our more open civilization, where we recognize that different people have and are entitled to different opinions on the nature of the universe and the question of its origins, the term has come to mean only people who have no belief in any gods. Still, if one is, say, a Hindu, then it follows that one is atheistic toward Jehovah. If one is Christian, then one is atheistic toward Shiva, Osiris, Jupiter, Odin, Baal, Cthulhu. In fact, a Christian is atheistic toward every other single Godhead, including the sunless Jehovah of Judaism and the Abrahamic Allah and his prophet Jesus that the Muslims worship under. You are all atheistic toward some Godhead or other, but we don't call you atheists because you do have the one thing that separates you from what we call an atheist today: faith in some God. Which brings us to the word agnostic. What is an agnostic and how is it different from a believer and from an atheist? If we ask most people, they will tell us that an agnostic does not know if there is a God or not, while an atheist does not believe there is a God. In fact, this is absolutely the correct distinction, but, and there is a but, it's a distinction with no real difference in most cases. I'll explain, but first, allow me to explain how we get the word agnostic in our vernacular in the first place. Those of you who are historically minded may be familiar with the term Gnostic. The Gnostics were an early branch of Christianity that took their name from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. That same root is where we get our modern word agnostic. Agnostic is a word often employed as synonymous with or slightly less committal than the word atheist. Unfortunately, this is a bit of misnomer, as I will explain. In the latter part of the 19th century, a biologist named Thomas Huxley coined the term agnostic from the Greek prefix a, without, and the root gnosis, knowledge. Huxley did not believe in the biblical description of God. In fact, he didn't believe in any description of God he had ever been presented with, yet he did not reject the possibility that something, some mover, had taken a part in the creation of life in the universe. Huxley acknowledged that he simply didn't know. He was without knowledge. He was, he said, agnostic. The problem with this word, however, is that, as I already noted, belief is not about knowledge, it's about faith. Most atheists who have a decent understanding of language, philosophy, and even theology will acknowledge that they do not know that there is no God. Most of us don't even believe that we know there is no God. In truth, most of us who are atheists don't actually even believe that there is no God. But I'll get back to that. What we as atheists do know is that though we don't know that there is no God, we don't believe that there is a God. So since we don't know that there is no God, and we don't know that there is a God, we are, all of us, agnostics. But in the same regard, nearly all believers, no matter how strongly they believe there is a God, none who has not personally and directly met God, none knows that there is a God. You believe. You take it on faith. But you don't know. And since you don't know, that means you are agnostics as well. A moment ago, I said that most atheists don't actually even believe that there is no God. When I say this, I am talking about what is known as weak atheism. The word weak in this context does not mean that our commitment to atheism is lax. It simply means that we recognize that the question of God's existence is unknowable. Those who assert that it is knowable and that the answer is no God exists are strong atheists, and they are few and far between. Another way to consider this is that if atheists who don't claim to know there is no God are agnostic atheists, then those who claim certain knowledge are Gnostic atheists. Similarly, believers who don't claim to know there is a God are agnostic theists, and those who do claim certain knowledge are Gnostic theists. However, at this point I would caution you not to assume that since we atheists recognize that the existence of God is unknowable, that it can be assumed we waver on the question, does the God described in the Bible exist? When I acknowledge that it may be possible that something which could be called God may exist, I am as certain as I am that the earth revolves around the sun that no theistic God concept that has ever been described to me is in any sense realistic, likely, probable, or even possibly true. Before I move on, one last point about the meaning of the word atheist. In 1905, an atheist named Bertrand Russell wrote a famous essay called On Denoting. In this essay, he discussed language and words and paid specific attention to predication and other oblique concepts of disambiguation of language. So you may come across an atheist who will say in all certainty that since a theist believes there is a God, and since an atheist is not a theist, then an atheist believes there is no God. However, I am here to tell you that no man, be he theist, atheist, or emissary of God himself, has the right to tell me what I do and do not believe. My atheism is rooted in skepticism. I lack belief in all things unproven. No one has proven to me that there is no God, and neither has anyone proven to me that there is. I do not have faith in God, so I am by definition an atheist. And that is the limit of the descriptive power of the word. So let's talk a little about faith. Faith is frequently cited as a virtue. The early church concocted a list of 7 virtues and 7 deadly sins. The lists underwent numerous revisions, but faith was always included in the category of virtues. I don't think it is too much of a stretch to assert, as obvious, that the church relies on faith for its very existence. Well, faith and charity at any rate. But what about faith makes it virtuous? Voltaire once wrote, "Is it a virtue to believe? Either what you believe seems true to you, and in this case there is no merit in believing, or it seems false to you, and then it is impossible for you to believe." He went on to conclude that the prudent man does good to himself, the virtuous man does good to mankind. St. Paul was right to tell you that charity prevails over faith and hope. Faith is belief without evidence. Another word for that is credulity. A third is gullibility. Consider that the church exalts those who believe on faith alone, yet all of the biblical heroes, including the 12 apostles, Moses, Noah, Abraham, Adam, all of the most heroic characters in the holiest of holy books in Christendom, to a man, none believed on faith alone. Why should I be expected to? Why should you? What makes it wrong for me to question whether the stories might be mere fables and seek evidence that they can't be? Then, failing to find such evidence, what makes it wrong to doubt? God's hiddenness is only a valid test of my faith if faith has merit. Yet in the case of the biblical God, for me, faith is not only belief despite direct evidence, it is actually belief despite evidence to the contrary. Another issue is the question of what exactly is it that we are being asked to have faith in. There are young earth churches that insist that the planet was created less than 6,000 years ago, that Adam and Eve were actual living people who populated the world, that dinosaurs coexisted with humans, that Noah's Ark was real, and 2 of every kind of animal including penguins, kangaroos, and each of the over 450,000 species of beetle went along for the ride because if it's in the Bible, that means God said it, they believe it, that settles it. On the other hand, there are churches which accept that the universe is almost 14 billion years old, that this planet is about 4.5 billion years old, that life began about 1 billion years after that, and that humans are the result of gradual evolution, with apes evolving from primates 25 million years ago, and the species known as human finally taking shape in the family of apes roughly 500,000 years ago, all under the guidance and supervision of an all-knowing, all-seeing God who designed every step of the process. Still others believe that God merely set the events along their inevitable course, and that he has had no further input since the initial moment of creation. Or, as Omar Khayyam, as translated by Fitzgerald, put it in his Rubaiyat, the moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. Such people are distinguished from theists as their view of God is an impersonal first cause alone, unmoved and unmovable by our prayers. We call them deists, and among their number we count Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. In fact, the entire question of what do we mean when we say God is very ambiguous. In human history, we have worshipped any of a number of discordant concepts and called them all God. Golden calves, volcanoes, cargo ships, living men, dead men, the earth, all of nature, even induced hallucinations. So what do I mean by God when I say I don't believe it? As Richard Dawkins wrote in his book, The God Delusion, if the word God is not to become completely useless, it should be used in the way that people have generally understood it, to denote a supernatural creator that is appropriate for us to worship. But I personally feel that an extra qualifier is required. As Thomas Aquinas once argued, it is impossible to go on to infinity in necessary things which have their necessity caused by another. Aquinas was referring to the law of causation. He was basically saying that if we go back in time far enough, all things have a first cause, but that first cause cannot have been uncaused. Aquinas thus determined that there must be presupposed something necessarily existing through its own nature, not having a cause elsewhere, but being itself the cause of the necessary existence of other things. Thus, Dawkins tells us that a God is a supernatural creator that is appropriate for us to worship, and Aquinas adds that it must be a necessary thing. I think we can all agree that such a being would be a God. So is there a necessary supernatural creator that is appropriate for us to worship? Well, speaking for myself, I feel that if I can imagine a universe that can exist without a supernatural creator, then the idea of such a creator becomes unnecessary. If I can imagine a moment of creation which is entirely accidental or incidental, then whatever the cause is unworthy of worship. In other words, if the universe exists because it must exist, then there is no reason to call any first cause, whether imaginary or real, natural or supernatural, God. In Islam, there is a theological, philosophical discipline known as KALＡM. Theologians practicing KALAM seek knowledge about the nature of Allah through debate. In Christianity, there is a practice of pro-theistic argumentation known as apologetics. Christian apologists sometimes employ an argument from KALAM known as the cosmological argument. This argument basically says in 3 parts that there had to be a first cause. 1. Everything that begins to exist was caused to exist. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Because of physics, this argument basically falls apart at the first point. Einstein tells us that energy is equal to the square of the speed of light times mass. This equivalence means that mass and energy are interchangeable. One becomes the other, and nothing is ever destroyed. It simply changes form. All mass is energy at rest. This is the first law of thermodynamics. Burn a log and it seems that the log is gone, but it isn't. Some of it is ash. Some is smoke. Most is dissipated as energy in the form of heat and light, but none of it is really gone from existence. It simply ceases to exist as a log. Along that same line, even though the log once came to exist as a log, before it was a log it was a branch, and pre-existing energy was incorporated to bulk it up. Before it was a branch, it was a twig. Before it was a twig, it was a knot on a tree trunk. The trunk was once a sapling. The sapling was once an acorn. The acorn came from a flower on another tree, and so on, all the way back to the beginning of time. Energy is brought into the system, converted, and eventually re-released back into the universe where it has always existed since the beginning of time. Everything has a cause, but nothing truly begins to exist. Not even the universe. So the real question is, if there is no God, then why is there a universe? Why is there life? As G.W. Leibniz asked, why is there something rather than nothing? The honest answer? I don't know. I don't claim to know. But I could just as easily ask, why is there a God to create something rather than nothing to create anything? However, I see no reason to complicate the question. Thank you.